A quick introduction. My name is Chris Bird. I'm the FIDE Events Manager at USGS. I'm joined by David Hayter. I'm sure most of you know Dave. Dave, do you want to introduce yourself? Say hi.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dave Hayter. I'm an executive board member, and I also direct a few tournaments from time to time. I think that's why Chris asked me here.
So what are we going to talk about tonight? So it really is just the administrative aspects of running a FIDE-rated event here in the US. So what you learned tonight might not be applicable at all to running a FIDE-rated event in another federation. This is basically the USGS procedures that we require based on us meeting the FIDE regulations and requirements that they have. So we're gonna basically go from registration of tournaments with FIDE, how to register them. Can your event actually be FIDE rated? There's obviously some regulations in place that say whether an event can or can't be FIDE rated. Arbiter requirements, what you need in terms of arbiters to run FIDE rated events. FIDE IDs, it's pretty self-explanatory. And then submission of rating reports, both USGS and FIDE, and the norms if you're running title events. Most national arbiters probably will never, haven't come across that yet unless they've been assisting at a title tournament, since they can't actually give titles. But that will be something they'll have to learn and develop how to do as they move on in their FIDE arbiter careers. Basically, this is how to administrate a FIDE rated event in the US. We're going to assume that you can look and find the regulations anywhere else that you need to. And if you got questions about those, I'm more than happy to answer those at some stage as well. So moving on, there are some useful links that it is very good for you all to be aware of that exist. The US Chess Tournament Director page is a simple enough URL, hopefully, to remember. And then that is sort of our catch-all where I put most of the stuff for tournament directors, but it's also a place where I put stuff for FIDE arbiters in the US. There's a big section in there for FIDE arbiters to look at things. Then also there's information on FIDE rated tournaments in the US, which is a document that used to exist in a PDF format. It's now on a web page, and it's being updated with all the new regulations, etc. And this presentation is predominantly based on that web page. So everything we cover tonight, you'll probably find in text format on that page. And then some useful thing, the FIDE handbook is, I'm sure you're all aware, that exists. The 2022 Arbiters Manual just came out recently. So if you haven't already downloaded that PDF, it's probably worth grabbing at some point. And then USGS actually has a FIDE email address. So instead of contacting me personally, you can send an email to just fide@usgs.org, and that way you don't have to remember how to spell my name. And 99 times out of 100, I'll be the one that responds to anything that hits that email address too. So, but it just makes it nice and simple, and we keep all the FIDE stuff in one pot. I will quickly just see if this works. Yay. So this is the tournament director page, and down here, you'll see FIDE rated events and FIDE arbiters and various little links. And this is the document I was talking about that basically will cover just about everything we're going to go through tonight. The only thing it doesn't do is have some stuff on titles. So it just refers you to the FIDE regulations on titles. Dave has just gone through this process for quite a few of the CCA events. So he knows all too well what's required for this. So the first step in any FIDE rated event is you've got to register that tournament. It's a requirement from FIDE. So all FIDE rated tournaments actually held in the world must be registered. But here in the US, you've got to register them via USGS. So they've got to come through us. There are some deadlines you need to meet for title tournaments. That's norm tournaments. You need to give USGS at least 33 days notice. Now that's 33 days prior to the start of the event. So you can actually give us more than that, For instance, Anand just registered his title tournament, I think yesterday, which is happening at the end of May. That is perfectly great. And we always like the more time, the better to register these tournaments. For non-title tournaments, that's just about everything else, we need that registration notification at least 6 days prior to the start of that tournament. Now, those are not the FIDE deadlines. Those are the USGS deadlines so that we can meet the FIDE deadlines. The FIDE deadlines are actually a little shorter than that, 30 days and 3 days, but we need the additional days so that we can check that the tournaments meet the regulations, and also, you know, should I actually not be available because it's a weekend or something along those lines, still give us time to meet the FIDE deadlines by you meeting the USGS deadline. So I got a question there, what happens if deadline missed? Well, if you miss the USGS deadlines, you run the risk of your tournament not being registered with FIDE, and the simplest way to put it is it won't be submitted to FIDE for rating. If you miss the FIDE deadlines, I can guarantee that your tournament will not be submitted to FIDE for rating. We don't go begging and pleading with FIDE that we missed this deadline, so can we please, pretty please, register this tournament and rate it? We don't do that. So basically, if you meet the USGS deadlines, we guarantee that your tournament is going to be registered. If you don't meet those deadlines, we'll do our best, but if you don't meet them, there's no guarantee that your tournament will be registered in time to be FIDE rated. Dave, anything you want to add?
That pretty much covers it.
I was hoping so. So what do you need to provide to USGS to register a tournament? There's quite a long list of things there. I won't go through them, but it's sort of self-explanatory that we need all of the information that we can get to register a tournament with FIDE. So this is basically allows me to determine whether your event is actually eligible to be FIDE rated or not at this aspect of it. So, but we definitely need things like the name of the tournament, and that has to be unique. So if you run the David Hayter Open, you know, and then next year you try and register the David Hayter Open, it's going to tell me you can't register that name because there's already a previous tournament that had that name. So it needs to become the second David Hayter Open or the 2023 David Hayter Open or something. So if you use dates, years, first, second, third, you know, those type of things, those are really good because they will help you avoid duplications. So that's the only thing that FIDE bases duplication on is the name. So it could be the same name of a tournament, but it's totally different in a separate state and whatever. You just happen to also have a David Hayter in your state and running the David Hayter Open. But if someone already beat you to it, you won't be able to name your tournament the David Hayter Open. So, and then we need the format, whether it's a title tournament, what the number of rounds, the time controls. Remember, there are regulations, and we'll briefly cover those, but expected number of players, not very important, but something in that box. So sometimes if it's an annual tournament, I'll look and see how many played in last year's and just put an estimate in there. The chief arbiter and chief organizer name and FIDE ID, that's really important. We can't register a tournament without having the chief arbiter listed. So whether that information actually changes later on, if you want to register something, Steve Emmett wants to register a tournament, lists himself as the chief arbiter, but he knows he's not going to be the chief arbiter, but someone else is going to do that job. You can provide us that information later on as the registration goes through, but to meet the registration deadlines, it's best to get that information in. So, but try not to just fake it. You know, try to give us at least realistic information if you can, because, you know, we'll still need that. But we can, at the time of rating an event, change the name of the chief arbiter if we have to. TLA website link. FIDE, one of the regulations is that in all advertising, the tournament must clearly be stated that it is FIDE rated. So we actually do check that. So that's why we have the If you submit a USGS TLA online, there's places where you can put that. There's an enable checkbox that says, yes, this event is FIDE rated. If you use your own personal website and don't use the USGS online TLA, then yeah, we prefer a link to that so we can make sure that everything in your advertising states that this event is going to be FIDE rated. We want the players to know that they're playing and it's a FIDE rated event, so they're not surprised when the event gets submitted to FIDE. Optional information, if you have additional arbiters and organizers, you can list those at that stage. It's not actually required. So we just need at least one chief arbiter and one chief organizer. If you're registering a tournament, just be aware that there are certain requirements in terms of time controls. If you've got specific tournaments that need a certain number of hours or whatever because of the rating of the opponents, usually if there's an open tournament, we'll expect that to be open, and therefore you meet that first standard that says rating of 2400 or higher, which gives players at least 2 hours each. And then you can go down from there. I noticed that CCA has just started running some events for players with a FIDE rating of under 2400. So they're now offering those at, I think it was gaming 80 plus or 85 plus 5 or 85 delay 5, I think, so that they got the minimum of 90 minutes. And then for title tournaments, you're forced to have the 2 hours and no more than 2 rounds a day. So for regular rated tournaments that are not title, you can theoretically have 3 rounds a day at gaming 90 plus 30. And a lot of tournaments do that. So, and then blitz and rapid rated time controls are listed.
I just answered a question in the chat. I figured I'd cover it for everyone. You mentioned that like CCA is running, several of their sections are FIDE rated and several are not.
Right.
Each individual section is considered its own tournament and needs to be registered separately.
That's correct.
And I'll step on a minefield here a little bit. I know we weren't going to talk about norms and all and that sort of thing, but you can add them all together to be a chess festival to get the number of players, but that's beyond the scope of what we're doing here.
Yeah, a little bit, but yes, you can. So there was a question I got asked in the chat. Can national arbiters be chief arbiter of a non-title event? Yes, national arbiters can be chief arbiters of FIDE rated events, just not title events. So here, the arbiter requirements are licensed IAs, FAs, NAs, who are also certified US chess tournament directors. They're permitted to work as arbiters in US chess FIDE rated tournaments. And here I put only IAs and FAs can be chief arbiter of title tournaments. And an appropriate level arbiter must be listed at the time of registering a tournament. So you can't register a title tournament with an NA as the chief arbiter. So that has to be registered with an FA or an IA. The thing also regarding arbiters, and we'll touch on this a little later too, is that only, the word only, so only licensed FIDE arbiters can work FIDE rated sections of an event or FIDE rated tournaments. That includes doing the pairings. So if you are having a FIDE rated section, you better make sure it's the FIDE arbiters doing the pairings and the flow work. So, if there's just one arbiter overseeing an entire event, one FIDE arbiter, because maybe it's a small event, I know sometimes there's the, you might want someone else to help you with pairings and stuff like you can't do that. So if it's a FIDE rated section, there shouldn't be anyone but people with FIDE arbiter licenses working and overseeing those entire events.
One of the things I would suggest, I know that NA can be chief arbiter of a FIDE rated events. I would be personally cautious of that just because I know how many things can go wrong, and unless you're an NA with a lot of experience, I would not want to go there.
Right. And just to let you know, NAs can work title tournaments. You can definitely work a title tournament. You just can't be the chief arbiter of a title tournament. So, you know, you need to have an FA or an IA that is the chief arbiter of the title tournament. So, but NAs can definitely, for experience, work those events and get their FA norms, and so that they can progress to that next level. There was a question regarding 3-minute blitz, FIDE rateable, not USCF rateable. I'm not quite sure what that means.
So the question was about a 3
Yeah.
with no delay.
No,
but
it actually has to be greater than 3. So 3 plus 2 is pretty common. 5 plus 0 is pretty common. If holding FIDE tournament with all players under 2400, what is the minimum time control? If they're all under 2400 FIDE, the minimum is 90 minutes. So like I said, CCA started to do some events that are under 2400 events, and they're running those with a time control of, I think it was 85 with delay 5. Is that right, Dave?
I think that's right. What
Okay.
CCA has made a concerted effort to do lately is get more people FIDE rated at the below open section level, because what we had found was promising juniors were shooting way up on US chess rating, and their FIDE rating lagged, and that was a nightmare pairing for people when they eventually came into the FIDE section, because they had very stale FIDE ratings, and people didn't like to play them, of course, because they're much stronger than their FIDE ratings. So we're trying to do our bit to help that out.
Right. All right. Let's mush on to one of my favorite areas of FIDE. So this is usually not contentious area, but this is an area that a lot of people don't quite understand and don't get, hence why we're going to talk about it. So, I mean, it really comes down to, in a nutshell, all players who participate in a FIDE-ready tournament must have a FIDE ID. So, as the chief arbiter of such an event, it's your responsibility to make sure everyone that's playing in that tournament has a FIDE ID. So there's no getting around that responsibility. So, you know, we've tried to make it as easy as possible for you to get those FIDE IDs, but it's really not US Chess's responsibility to ensure that this has happened. It's up to you. And if your players don't have a FIDE ID, the tournament just can't be FIDE rated, obviously. So just to clarify, US Chess, we can only assign USA FIDE IDs. So if someone wants to belong to another federation, we cannot help or assist with that. They have to approach that other federation. To receive a USA FIDE ID, a player must have citizenship, naturalization, or residency in the USA. Now, by residency, I don't mean they're here on vacation. They've got to have a permanent residency here in the USA, but that doesn't mean they've got to be a permanent resident, which is like a green card. You know, they've just got to be living here on a permanent basis, more permanent than being here on vacation. So once you reach that, you can apply to receive a FIDE ID. So the question here, can a foreign student studying get a USA ID? Yes, absolutely. As long as they're living here in the US and not doing it remotely, they can get a USA FIDE ID. Yes. So US Chess is, we've got 3 methods of obtaining USA FIDE IDs for eligible players. Now remember, that's only USA FIDE IDs. So we have a US Chess FIDE ID request form. It's a Google link. I'm going to take you there right now. Basically, it's this form, and the players will fill this out. It asks them if they're a current or past US Chess member. It takes them to the next page. If they are a current or past US Chess member, they're going to enter that ID number. We can check from that membership number whether they have a USA residence and stuff like that, and process them an ID that way. If they're not a current US Chess member, it asks them to upload documentation that proves that they actually meet those requirements, like a copy of passport, a driver's license, you know, that's valid right now, something along those lines, and then we will give them a FIDE ID. Now, there's it's not necessary to have a US chess membership for someone to obtain a USA FIDE ID, but predominantly the people that are playing in your tournaments will have US chess memberships because they're playing in a US chess / FIDE rated tournament. So, so you can get them to complete that form. So that is something a player should complete. I don't recommend the arbiter goes and completes all the information on that because you might not have all of the information. And also because when I write back to the email address that's provided as part of completing that form, I'm going to send my FIDE ID to that email address. So, and hopefully that should be the player's email address. So I then send them an email saying, hey, your request has been approved. Here's your FIDE ID. So the player actually has that information. The other thing is, and this is probably the simplest thing, and I think this is what CCA does, you can send an email to FIDE@uschess.org, providing just the name and the US Chess ID, but you've got to provide a statement saying that you've checked with this player and the player is eligible to and has agreed to receive a USA FIDE ID. So what we don't want is people just being assigned USA FIDE IDs and then for them to come back and say, I never requested to get a FIDE ID. I'm really from Germany. I want my FIDE ID to be German. And then we've got an issue because for them to transfer to Germany, there's going to be cost involved. There's going to be paperwork on behalf of the German Federation that are going to have to do that. They've got to then be transferred to the other federation, which can take up to 90 days. So we've had people contact us and say, I didn't request to receive a India Chess Federation ID. I really want it to be USA, and it's a process to get people transferred. So you as the chief arbiter, whether you delegate that to someone else or not, but it's your responsibility as the chief arbiter to check with each and every player that doesn't have a FIDE ID that they are eligible to get that and they agree to have a USA FIDE ID. Now, if you send me that email with that wording, that is enough for US Chess to come back to you if we have a problem with this player in the future. But this is a simple way because we will then look up the rest of their information, their date of birth and their email address and various things from the US Chess membership database. So you don't necessarily have to have that. But if that information is not in the US Chess database, we're going to come back to you and ask you for that information. So you better be able to get that from the player at some point. The other alternative is there is a form that's also on the page where it's a PDF basically, and you print it out at your tournament and you basically walk around to the players and get them to fill out their information and they check a little box to say, yes, I agree that I want a USA FIDE ID. And then you submit that paperwork to me and we try to respond within 24 to 48 hours. I say I try to respond within 24 to 48 hours and get these FIDE IDs assigned because I know 9 times out of 10, you're at the tournament and you want those FIDE IDs. And the question is, all players in a FIDE section need a FIDE ID? Yes, absolutely. All players playing in a FIDE-rated tournament need a FIDE ID. Another question, what are the consequences for a foreign player who gets a US ID and then wants to change it to his country? Hopefully I just covered that. So there are, like I said, it's a process to transfer. So for non-USA players, those players who citizen of another country, they're just here on vacation, maybe participate in your tournament, they must contact their own federation and request a FIDE ID. Each federation has its own process on how to do this, some quicker than others. The earlier you start the ball running on that, the more likely you are to have a FIDE ID for your tournament, and you need to all players to have a FIDE ID before you send that stuff to US Chess for FIDE rating. So, and then here I put something about non-federation associated FIDE ID. It is possible for a player to pay 60 euros, get a non-federation affiliated FIDE ID, but it's up to you to collect that information. There is information on the website on how to do that and what the process is. We recommend it's not. I don't recommend it, but if someone has to have that, then they can do that. There's just a cost involved. There's a question, what is turnaround time if a player submits the FIDE ID request form, it's the same again. I try to get them done within 24 to 48 hours. So nobody at USGS sleeps. So you know, we're available 24/7. I mentioned changing federation is money, so foreign nationalities should really think about what federation. Absolutely, yeah, they should really be committed to whatever federation they're going to join, because if they join or get a FIDE ID with a specific federation, the only way to change that is through the transfer request feature. There's a question: can you get the FIDE ID or submit for the ID after the tournament? So we're gonna sort of cover this, I think, a little bit. So let's move on. Timeline. So all players must have a FIDE ID at time of submission of the FIDE rating report to USGS. We try to process those within 24 to 48 hours. Other federations have their own processes. It can take a long time. And we had one instance of a guy trying to get a China federation. It takes a long time. So the sooner you can identify these people, the better. Best practices, Dave. I think CCA has their stuff right. What happens with you guys when you're looking for these people?
You know, I really have to emphasize that again. Best practice is do not wait till the tournament's over and then try to get the information, because then you're chasing it down and you can't rate the tournament, and that causes problems. You're better off, you know, if you can get all the advanced registrations assigned FIDE IDs before the round even starts, that's great. I would verify, I personally verify memberships when I direct a tournament when I merge the sections, because then everybody's in the same file. That is a little bit risky even, because somebody could withdraw before the merge and then you're chasing them. But I find that doing it right when I merge is a pretty good idea. And then if something goes wrong, I can still track them down. Chris is really good about responding I mean, he says 24 to 48. He's very good at responding. He doesn't sleep, you know, and he gets this to you. And then if something goes wrong, you can track down the player, say on Sunday of your tournament, and still have a chance to get the tournament rated when the tournament's over. So earlier is better. I have personally played in tournaments in Europe, and some of the tournaments I've played at, they won't even accept your registration unless you're FIDE rated or FIDE ID in advance. So we do it a little lenient here, and that's probably good, but be careful, because you will hold up the rating of an event, and you really don't want to do that.
So a couple of quick questions that came up here in the chat. Is the non-federation the only option if the player's federation hasn't responded by round 1? So if the player has actually started the process of requesting a FIDE ID, you should run that through, because if we then assign him a non-federation FIDE ID, he's going to end up maybe with 2 FIDE IDs at some point. So I often get asked this question: what do I do if a foreign player turns up on my doorstep, wants to play in the tournament, but wants to request a FIDE ID? You know, how does this hold things up? So I respond back to that with, it's your event, you're the chief arbiter, you're responsible for ensuring all the players have a FIDE ID. USGS can't help you with this. We can't approach other federations, ask them to speed up or whatever. You can't submit that tournament to us until all players have a FIDE ID. If you don't meet our regulations, we're going to come chomping down on you. So it's up to you how you handle specific cases of foreign players showing up and wanting to play in your tournament, but they don't have a FIDE ID. So that, you know, I hate to pass the buck on to the tournaments, but that is something that there is no great solution to. And you run the risk of you not meeting the regulations if this player has to start the process of contacting his federation and trying to get a FIDE ID, etc. So they won't give it to you as the organizer. They'll want some proof that this person meets their requirements, whatever they are. So that's the risk you run. So there was also a question: is there a website a player can go to that lists connections to many federations? You know, actually, so on our page, FIDE actually has, and I'll pull this up here. Here I have FIDE IDs, and it says foreign players not eligible must contact. And here FIDE itself has a list of contacts for every federation. So they all have rating officers listed, etc. So that will provide them where they need to contact. More often than not, there's someone that's identified as a rating officer, like this guy. That would be the person that someone would need to contact to obtain a FIDE ID for that particular federation. So we definitely link that on our FIDE Arbiter TD page. And here I say again, yeah, it's better to identify these players out FIDE IDs as soon as you possibly can. So if this is during the registration process, you've still got 3 weeks before your tournament starts, start working on getting a FIDE ID. I get emails from Bob Messenger on behalf of CCA well before these events happen to get people FIDE IDs. So so then when it comes time to running the tournament, just about everybody has a FIDE ID unless they're showing up on the doorstep without one. And I also just want to mention this this website that's put together by Bill Buckles, and it's for Swisses, but here it's a combined player database file, and these databases, actually, if you download and use this and put it into Swisses and you've got the US chess IDs, there's an update feature where it will run through everybody that's in the database that has a FIDE ID and populate that FIDE ID field for you. So then when you're in Swisses, you can easily just identify the people that don't have a FIDE ID. Now, it could be because they've just got one assigned recently, because this is only done on a monthly basis. So if you ask for a FIDE ID today and I give you one in an hour, they're not going to be in this database because it was prepared on February 1. So, but they'll be in that March database when that time to download comes. So this is just a good update to do prior to your tournament starting. You can easily see at a glance, as long as you have that other ID shown, who has a FIDE ID. So this is very useful. And I use this all the time when you submit the rating reports to me to do my work. So just wanted to mention that that is available, and it's linked on our website again. Anyway, so let's move on from FIDE IDs to actually submitting a FIDE rated tournament report. So there are deadlines, and they've all just got confusing with the recent updates to the FIDE regulations. Oh, sorry, just wanted to mention Walter Brown, who's on the QC, mentioned one quick thing regarding arbiters. Just remember, if you're running a title tournament, an arbiter cannot be a house player in a title tournament. So if you're an arbiter and you're listed as working in that section, or you're part of that tournament, title tournaments cannot use house players. Well, they can't use arbiters as house players. So just remember, so it will invalidate the entire tournament for norms. So just be fully aware of that. Anyway, coming on to deadlines. So FIDE's philosophy in terms of rating tournaments is they want everything that was played in that month to be rated in that month. So tournaments in February, they want them to be rated in time for the March rating list. Obviously, if it finishes on the February 28th, FIDE actually published the March rating list on February 28th, it's not going to happen. But they have, if the tournament ends at least 6 days prior to the end of that month, it has to be submitted in that month to FIDE for rating. So this means your turnaround time, if you have a tournament that ends towards the end of the month, is going to be much shorter than the standard 7-day deadline, which you get. So normally the deadline is 7 days, unless your tournament is finishing towards the end of the month, in which case it might be shorter. So here I put a little example of what happens like at the end of March. If your tournament finishes between March 22 to 25th, you have until March 28, 3 days prior to the end of the month, to get that tournament to submit it to US Chess for rating, and also to get that tournament submitted to me for FIDE rating. And we'll cover the process of that later on. So hopefully this makes sense as to why we want this done. The FIDE deadline is actually a little shorter than that, but we need time to turn it around and submit it to FIDE. So, and then also we have, and I think Judith Starry is on the phone. I think she's one of the few clubs up there that actually run tournaments that last longer than 30 days. If you run one tournament, one round a week for 6 weeks, you are now categorized as a tournament that lasts more than 30 days. in which case FIDE now wants interim rating reports submitted. So all the games in February will be submitted at the end of February for rating, and then the games played in March will be submitted in March for rating for the April list. So there are some specific deadlines. The 4 days that I mentioned here is earlier than the 3 days for previous. We have a little more work in the office to do with these events because we don't have the US chess rating report submitted for these interim rating reports. So it means a little more harder work for us in terms of verification, but that's not something you have to worry about. You'll basically submit us the tournament files just 4 days prior to the end of the month, and we get those interim reports submitted to FIDE. And remember, those reports only get submitted to FIDE. So if you're on round, you run round 1 to 3 of a 6-week tournament, that will only get submitted to FIDE at that point. You don't submit a US chess rating report for those 3 rounds, and then later you'll submit the US chess rating report as you normally would at the end of the tournament with all 6 rounds in. FIDE will just show it as 2 separate events. So that's sort of important from their perspective. So everything will be registered. You'll see these registrations of, the mechanics chess tournament weeks, rounds 1 through 2, and then mechanics chess tournament rounds, 3 through 6. Do they need 2 names? No, they don't. They can actually be the same name. So we identify them differently because of the rounds. But that's something that the FIDE rating system does internally. So just quickly, we're talking about rating reports, US chess IDs for foreign GNs, WGNs, WIMs. I think we're all aware of the requirement that foreign players who have those titles don't need to have a current US chess membership. The process of getting them an ID if they don't already have a US chess ID. Now remember, I'm talking about US chess ID. They're definitely going to have a FIDE ID already if they have one of those titles. You will use the membership batch process to obtain a US chess ID if needed. So you'll go into that batch, that wonderful batch process that we have, and there's an option to select title player. You'll punch in all that information. The downside about that is there's nowhere in that form to put their FIDE ID. So they will not link automatically. This means you then have to follow up with an email to fide@uschess.org. Once you have that US chess ID, give me the US chess ID, the player's name, and tell me what their FIDE ID is, and we'll go in there immediately and just link that. So the FIDE ID appears on that US chess membership record. So you want to submit your FIDE rated tournament report. The first step in doing this is you submit the event to US chess for rating. And then there's a couple of things that you need to ensure happen when you do that. You've got to ensure the FIDE rated box is checked for all sections to be FIDE rated. So if you have an open, under 23, under 21, they're all FIDE rated. You got to make sure that box on every tournament rating report when you submit it is checked that says FIDE rated. The organizer is a US chess ID, not the affiliate number. So make sure that, and I'm going to show you where you'll put this. Remember that only licensed FIDE arbiters can be listed as TDs in the US chess rating report. And if the tournament has at least 1 FIDE rated section, then only licensed FIDE arbiters can be listed in the overall section of the US chess rating report. And I'll show you where that is as well. I'm sure you're all aware of this, but we're going to cover it, for the presentation perspective. And then where to list the TDs. So we have specific spots on those rating reports where we want TDs to be listed, because that's going to transition over to the FIDE rating report. 99 times out of 100, the only arbiter that's on the FIDE rating registration, the report registration, is the name of the chief arbiter. When we submit the rating report, we'll then transition the information that's on the US chess rating report over to the FIDE rating report as deputy arbiters or just arbiters or whatever position they had. So there's certain boxes we want you to fill out on the US chess rating report, put people in the right places, and that way it will transition automatically over to the FIDE rating report. Dave, I know you submitted 1 or 2 US chess rating reports in your time. Anything you want to cover in terms of doing this, or?
Only that, the US chess system was designed to support US chess TD certification, and the FIDE was designed to support FIDE, and they're not a one-to-one match. So they're doing the best they can to try to figure that out, but it's not a one-to-one correlation. Now, Chris did mention that the US chess policy is if you are listed in the global part, so what I would call sort of above the line as the chief TD, the chief assistant, or one of those directors, and your section has FIDE IDs, then you need to be licensed. And I recently had one, and I did work this with Chris. I didn't follow the exact way that he just mentioned it, and for good reason. And I explained to him what I did and why. And as long as you're not trying to game the system, that can work. But the issue is if FIDE checks our homework, and they have in the past, and the US chess rating report is different than the FIDE rating report, it makes it look like we're trying to do some shenanigans. And you can't do that. And that used to be a problem in US chess. It has not been a problem of late, and we want to keep it that way.
Right. And that's predominantly what it boils down to, is we've got to make sure that from the FIDE perspective, we're doing everything we can to make sure everything is matching on these, and make sure everything in terms of FIDE ready tournaments, we're running them correctly. The good question that popped up, how do you handle a foreign arbiter who does not have a US chess ID? So remember, an arbiter cannot be listed on a US chess rating report unless they have US chess TD certification. So they have to then get a membership and become a US Chess Club TD by signing the form, at which point they'll get a US Chess ID. So there's no way you should have an arbiter working your event that doesn't have a US Chess ID, because they all have to be US Chess certified TDs too to work these events. So that's a US chess thing as well. So if they're, there isn't such a thing here in the US, it's just a FIDE ready tournament. They're all US chess / FIDE ready tournaments. So they're all submitted to US chess for FIDE rating too. So just to quickly run through the things we mentioned. So this is the organizer field. You'll see I'm just in a rating report here. So normally a lot of this information would be filled in. If you have an organizer, that would be the US Chess ID. And down here is the FIDE rated checkbox right there. So you've got to make sure that that is done. This is your global area when it comes to listing your TDs. So this is your tournament information. So the people in here are assumed to have been dealing with all of the sections in an event. So your chief TD, if you put a chief assistant, an assistant in here, if you have one FIDE rated section, these all have to be licensed FIDE arbiters. And on this side, your section chief and your chief assistant. So this is your chief arbiter from FIDE rating report perspective. Sorry, chief TD is the chief arbiter. Chief assistant is the first deputy arbiter spot. Your section chief TD is your second deputy arbiter spot from the FIDE perspective. And then everybody else will just be listed as arbiter on the FIDE rating report. So I just wanted to mention that. Hopefully this makes this a little bit self-explanatory as to what to do. So this is step one, the US chess rating report. And then the second step is, once you have that, so you'll take those exact same file that you use to submit your US chess rating report and submit it to US chess via email. Now, I guess I can't say the exact same file, because if you submitted the US chess rating report using a non-FIDE endorsed program, you're going to have to somehow get your tournament into a FIDE endorsed program and then submit that file to US chess. So we will only accept the pairing program files on FIDE endorsed pairing programs. One of the US chess major programs is not FIDE endorsed right now. So if you use that program to pair and submit your event to US chess for rating, you're going to have to also duplicate whatever information into a FIDE endorsed program and send that. And the files must be submitted by the same deadline. So the same 7 days or a few days are all applicable. So the US chess, when I say rating report deadlines, it's both the US chess rating report and the FIDE rating report. What do you submit to US chess? So the final tournament file, so for example, I'm going to use Swiss since that is a FIDE endorsed program. and it's one that can handle USGS rating reports too. If it's a 5-round event, you'll give me the S5C file, which is the one that presumably you use to create the USGS rating report files from to do that upload. If you have a tournament with multiple schedules and some of them are not eligible to be FIDE rated, you also need to give me those pre-merge files. So say, for instance, you have a 2-day schedule and rounds 1 or 2 of the 2-day schedule are not FIDE rated. You're going to send me that 2day.s2c file, which has all the results in. You're going to send me that file as well as the S5C, just those 2 files, and you're going to send those to me in an email and say, hey, Chris, here's the 2 files. Rounds 1 and 2 of the 2-day are not FIDE rateable. Now it's your job. So each section that's FIDE rateable as well obviously needs to be submitted as a separate file, but you can combine those into one email, obviously. So if you have an open under 23 and under 21, you can give me all those files in the same email. You don't have to separate them out. Just make sure the files are named accordingly so that I know what's different. There's a question in the chat that says if you use a non-FIDE endorsed program, you would have to transfer the data to a FIDE endorsed program. Shouldn't that be a violation since the pairings might not have been accurate? Actually, you won't find a FIDE regulation that states that the pairings must be done using a FIDE endorsed program. So yes, you'll find regulations that state the pairings must be FIDE pairings, but there's no regulation that states you need to use a FIDE endorsed pairing program to actually do the pairings. So it's you again as the arbiters that are responsible for knowing what the FIDE pairing laws are, or however you want to pair that for the tournaments. I'm not going to get into the regulations too much, but it's up to you to know what you're doing with these pairings. But when you can submit the file so that I can produce the necessary documentation I need to submit that report, the FIDE endorsed programs have all the capabilities I need to do what I need to do. That's why we need that information on a FIDE endorsed program. I will tell you 99% of the tournaments in the country use SwissSys. It is a FIDE endorsed program. It does USGS rating reports too. And it meets our needs for that. So, it covers all bases. But there is another program out there that people do use. So it just causes an issue when we try to do FIDE rating reports using that program. And what information do you need to give on each player? Well, we've already covered this, but all players must have their name, USGS ID, and FIDE ID completed in the pairing program file. So if you're using SwissSys, make sure both of those IDs are filled out. I don't even need the ratings of the players because that's all just going to get changed to whatever the ratings are at the time I submit it to the rating report. So, but it must have the name of the player, USGS ID, and the FIDE ID. Obviously, you've got to have all the results from the tournament and various things that must match what was submitted to USGS. If you give me a pairing program file that has that information in, I can do what I need to do to submit the tournament report file to FIDE. Someone says, one, we need to edit the 2C file if some of the info wasn't known, then yeah, for sure. You might have to go back and just add some information for the 2-day schedule or something like that. But make sure all that information is in when you submit those files to me. Okay. Dave, anything that you want to add on this? I know you've submitted a bunch of stuff to me lately, so.
I just answered a question in the chat. This is covering SwissSys. If you want to run, if you run a round robin tournament, you would just submit the final round robin.
Yeah, the SRR file or whatever.
The SRR file, and you wouldn't have any non-rated games, or I wouldn't think you would. You would just be submitting one file because there wouldn't be separate schedules.
You get charged a minimum for a Swiss, $60 minimum for a FIDE rating fee on a Swiss, and potentially more than that. But if you have a 10-player round robin and this was low enough ratings, you get charged per player a much smaller fee. So, but if you submitted it as a Swiss, you're going to get charged that $60 minimum. So make sure the tournament is submitted to USGS as well, as it's meant to be. Because if it's really a round robin, we want that to show as a round robin on the USGS rating report, and it's going to be a round robin on the FIDE rating report. So just make sure that's that information. Yeah, and learn how to use the pairing programs, obviously.
Yeah, I got another question, and I'm not even sure the answer to this, so maybe somebody can help me out because I've never done this. I would think it does, but the question was, does SwissSys support Schwenningen pairings? I would think it does, but I've never used it, so I don't know.
Yeah, I think you can do the team stuff, Schwenningen pairings in SwissSys for sure. I believe I've had tournaments submitted to me like that as well, and Tom's giving me a thumbs up as well.
Another question was, suppose you have a 2-day schedule, can it be FIDE rated? Well, the answer is, if it meets the minimum rating, yes, it can, the minimum rateable time control. But typically, the 2-day schedules don't meet that. That's the whole reason that it's separated.
So when submitting FIDE rated tournament reports, I just wanted to include this because what not to provide, because sometimes when people submit these files to me, they give me everything related to the tournament, and it's way overkill, and I don't need it, and it's more trouble for me to work out and pick and grab the 2 files that I need from the 30 files that they give me. So what we don't need is all the rounds and files from the parent program. So I don't need the S0C, the S1A, the S1B, the S1C, the S2A. I just need those final files that I mentioned to be able to pick and choose. I don't need the 3 upload files that you use to create the USGS rating report. Those, the TD export.tba or whatever those things are. I don't need those. And don't submit even though you, some of you know how to do a FIDE tournament report file, which is a TRF, which is what I upload to FIDE to submit these rating reports. There's no use in you submitting that to me because 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be accurate anyway. And I have to do it. So I'm just going to do it anyway. So don't bother just giving me that tournament report file. And that certainly cannot be used instead of providing me the necessary program files. I've had people just submit me that TRF, and I write back to them and say, you got to give me the parent program files so that we can do that ourselves. And a special note, hybrid events. So all hybrid events, I'm sure you're aware of hybrid online stuff. So there is a couple of organizers that do run hybrid FIDE rated tournaments. All hybrid events must also include a PGN of all those games that were played for them to just be FIDE rated. So there's no hybrid title tournaments right now. So this is just even for just regular FIDE rated tournaments, you've got to submit a PGN of all those games. So moving on to like our last subject, I think, submitting norm reports. So player norms. So this only obviously relates to title tournaments. But it's, if you're a national arbiter and you haven't come across this, you might need to do it at some point. It'd be a good learning thing if you're at a title tournament for you to get your norms and your arbiter norms. The chief arbiter, again, is responsible for the timely completion of all forms and submission to USGS. So this process has slightly changed with the recent regulations. There's no longer the requirement to give a player a copy of a norm at a tournament. So the player was getting a copy of the norm form. It was signed by the chief arbiter, but it wasn't signed by the federation. Completely useless. Nobody can process a norm form unless it's authenticated by the federation. So now the process is the chief arbiter sends that to the federation for authentication and approval. I, as the federation, will then send it on to FIDE and send a copy back to you as the chief arbiter. And usually I also include the player who earned the norm, but you as the chief arbiter can then send that back to the player so they've actually got something that's useful to them. Because unless it's authenticated by the National Federation, it doesn't mean anything. So I'll have USA players that go and play in tournaments abroad, and they'll say, hey, Chris, so-and-so just scored his last IM norm, here's a copy of the norm, but it hasn't been through the federation to feed, and various things. Without that authentication, I can't use it in a title application or do anything with it. So I have to respond to them and say, hey, that's great, well done. I've just got to wait for the official norm to come through that's signed by the federation, then we can process the application. USGS will review, and if approved, like I said, send it back. You don't have to submit title norms at the same time you submit the rating report. Get the rating report submitted for a tournament, and you can work on the norms at a later date or within a few days, and then submit them later. But it's very important to get that rating report submitted. So get the rating report in, and then get me the norm paperwork and everything later on. So that's okay to do that. All title tournaments where norms are achieved must submit a PGN file. So this is new. if you're going to submit a player norm, you achieved a norm at your event, that better be accompanied by a PGN file that includes all of their games for a Swiss or a team tournament at a minimum. So preferably the more games, the better, but it has to at a minimum include all of their games, or 9 games, 10 games, whatever, however many they played. Or if it's a round robin tournament, it's got to have every game from the round robin tournament in. So even those for the players that didn't score norms. So we must have that PGN submission, otherwise we can't authenticate the norm. So you've got to submit that at the time that you do the norm forms. There's a question in the chat, is there PDF fillable FIDE report forms online? There's copies in the handbook. Actually, the FIDE forms that they put online are not PDF fillable, unfortunately. But if you email me, I can actually send you back a Word document that's fillable. Dave, anything you want to add on submission of norms? Because I know you just did.
Yeah, a big shout out to Chris for creating those forms, because those Word documents are incredibly helpful, and I recommend using them. They are also incredibly helpful if you have atrociously bad handwriting like me, and you don't want to handwrite your norms. So I strongly recommend those fillable forms are great.
And you can also, even if the programs can print the forms, I usually find they're not the greatest sort of forms in the world, but you know, most like all the FIDE NDOS programs should definitely be able to produce you a player norm certificate or something resembling that. So you can at least use that to gather all the information if you want to put it on a nice form, or you can use that as the actual norm form, you know.
And here I would tell you best practice if you're running a norm tournament. I would, and I do, and when I'm running the tournaments, and I know several others do also, collect every single score sheet from every player playing every game in the FIDE section. The other thing you should do, I strongly recommend collecting the original score sheet, not the copy. And the player may say, well, I want to give you the copy because, you know, I can't read the copy. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly why I want the original. Because you're going to be responsible, and I've deciphered enough score sheets in my time. You know, my personal database is thousands of games played in CCA events that I have personally keystroked into ChessBase, and I will tell you, and I can tell you which grandmasters have good handwriting and which grandmasters have bad handwriting. And if you submitted to me a grandmaster score sheet without their name on it, I might even be able to recognize their handwriting if they play in a lot of events. But having said all that, original score sheets will make your job so much easier. Now, you can also tell the player if they made a norm, I want you to submit the PGN file. Pluses and minuses to do that. Makes your job easier, but now you're taking responsibility that those moves on that score sheet were actually played in the game. And they probably were, but you know, I like having both players' score sheets, and when they both agree, I can be pretty certain that those were in fact the moves played in the game. So how you do that is up to you as chief arbiter, but please remember, you are ultimately responsible, and make your job easier. That'd be my advice to you.
So then, just quickly, we want to cover arbiter norms because you know, especially national arbiters, FIDE arbiters, and even IAs should know how to give arbiter norms. So again, the chief arbiter is responsible for completing these norm forms and submission to USGS. There are some things to be aware of. So if the arbiter norm is for the chief arbiter, so say you're the only arbiter in an event, you're the chief arbiter and you want a norm, then you must have a supervisor who holds IA, FA, or IO, which is International Organizer, must complete and sign that norm form. So if you're the NA and you're the chief arbiter, and there's someone who's organizing this tournament and they don't have any of those titles, you're not going to be able to get a norm from this event. If you're an NA and you're the chief arbiter and you happen to have an FA or an IA underneath you as a deputy arbiter, you're still not going to be able to get a norm at this event, because if they're underneath you as your deputy, they're no longer your supervisor. So put people in the right positions if you want these norms. So just be aware of that. This is what FIDE arbiters have now, the Arbiter Commission have introduced this. I mean, it makes sense. Your norms have to be submitted by someone who is your supervisor, so that they can judge whether you actually have met the performance necessary to attain those titles. So just be fully aware of that. And again, USGS will review the Arbiter norm forms and send them back and whatever. And again, this can be done after the submission of the rating reports. So there's no desperate need to get these Arbiter norms in with the rating reports. Get the rating report submitted, and then we can do that. There's a question in the chat from Steve Emmett. The chief arbiter is required to transcribe the score sheets of all players who achieve norms. Is there a deadline for transcribing the PGN files? Well, here you'll see that I've put the wording is responsible for timely completion. There is actually no set deadline in the regulations that says a norm must be submitted within X number of days of the tournament completion. If it's your responsibility to do this. If you're running a title tournament, if you're running live broadcast, obviously you'll have the DGT or whatever stuff like that, so you'll have access to some games. But yeah, I mean, if a player wants their title, their norm certificate, it's not going to be authenticated until you provide that PGN file. So, I say timely submission. I would say within a week is a good timely completion. I would say 2 years is not a good timely completion. So, the player is going to be clamoring all over for you for that norm certificate, and they're going to be very disappointed when USGS won't sign off on it because we don't have what we need to sign off on it.
Hey, Chris, I need to kick a question up over to you.
Yep.
The question was about Swiss Manager, and can the Swiss Manager norm forms be submitted to you? And I don't know what your policy is on that.
Yeah, no. Yeah, it's a norm form. Yeah, exactly. So as long as it has the information on the norm form, we can use the norm forms. They've just got to have certain standard information on there. If it doesn't have the privacy policy text anymore, we need to have that. The actual norm forms themselves are on the FIDE website. So just go to the relevant bit. In the titles of player titles, you'll find the IT ones. In the Arbiter stuff, you'll find the FA ones and the IA ones. The organizer ones you find. So they're not all in one specific spot, but you can find them depending on what whether it's a player or an arbiter or an organizer norm that you're completing. So you can see what is there. And then there's another question: is there a maximum number of arbiter norms that can be issued for a norm tournament? Yes, there is. That's included in the arbiter regulations. I recommend at some point you go and check the handbook on the arbiter regulations. I think Swiss tournaments now it's 1 for every 25 players, or part thereof. It used to be 1 per 50. So that has been reduced to help increase the number of norms that can be arbiter norms that can be awarded at tournaments. So I just briefly wanted to cover, so we're sort of towards the end now, but wanted to highlight this responsibilities page and who is responsible for what. And here, there's various items here: registration of the tournament, hiring of FIDE arbiters, overseeing the tournament, ensuring players have FIDE IDs, USGS rating report, FIDE rating report, norm paperwork, meeting the PGM requirement. These are all responsibilities of that chief arbiter. So if you're the chief arbiter, yes, you can delegate some of these responsibilities. Obviously, overseeing the tournament, if you have multiple arbiters at that, you're delegating some of that. But you as the chief arbiter have complete responsibility for all of these things. Now you see I've got chief arbiter in parentheses there after chief organizer. If you as the chief arbiter, you are scheduled to work an event, and you see that your organizer has not yet registered the event, but all the details are there and the deadline to register this event is approaching, I would highly recommend you get on that chief organizer to get that event registered. Otherwise, they're going to be very sad when the chief arbiter says, well, we didn't register the event and now it can't be FIDE rated. Again, with the hiring of FIDE arbiters, probably an organizer responsibility, but I would assume in cooperation with the FIDE, with the chief arbiter, about the hiring of arbiters. So, I mean, it basically boils down to, if you're the chief arbiter of this event, you have a lot of responsibility and you can't shirk that responsibility. Ultimately, if there's an issue with this tournament, I'm coming back to you as the chief arbiter to say, where are the files? Where's the rating report? you know, even if someone else was doing the pairings, I'm coming to you because your name is listed on the registration. You'll be the person on my hit list, whether that's someone else thing. Yeah, and there was a thing here that said, thanks, Walter. Yeah, it should be, instead of hiring of FIDE arbiters, they should be hiring of licensed FIDE arbiters. There are some people that still have their FIDE arbiter titles, but they're not licensed. They're either inactive, they haven't done anything for a long time. They need to become active and licensed again before they can start working legitimately at these tournaments, if that's something they want to do. So, you know, the question of a licensed arbiter against a title, you know, an arbiter that holds a title, but they're inactive or not licensed. And you'll actually find now in the FIDE profiles, FIDE have started actually putting your license information on your FIDE profile. So it will tell you FIDE arbiter licensed and what year you were licensed. So just be aware of all that.
I was going to comment on that. If you run a tournament that has multiple sections and some are FIDE rated and some are not, your non-FIDE, your people that don't have licenses cannot make rulings in your FIDE sections. So it's important to know where the board numbers leave off and where your non-rated sections, non-FIDE rated sections begin, because if a TD ventures into that FIDE rated area, the player doesn't know, and they have a tendency to ask him a question, and that director, that arbiter, needs to have the you know, the foresight to go get somebody who is licensed, who can make the decision, even if they think they know what the correct decision is. You have to have a license in order to be an arbiter. That's the point.
Right. And that basically boils down to the, you know, the nutshell is, if you're running a FIDE rated tournament, it has to use the FIDE laws of chess. So, and presumably the licensed FIDE arbiters know what those laws of chess are, and therefore should be able to answer that question correctly. There's a question I got asked: does the license continue on unless you are inactive? Yeah, it does for now. So when I say that, while I've got all your attention, coming into arbiter regulations soon will be for everybody who is a licensed FIDE arbiter. You'll have to undertake a refresher course every 4 years to maintain that license. So the details of all that are still to be worked out. Don't want to scare anyone, but that is coming down the pipeline from the Arbiters Commission. So right now, if you're a licensed FIDE arbiter and you're active, you're good. Just wanted to post these useful links again. Hopefully you will find these useful. The second one there, the information on FIDE rated tournaments, basically covers everything in a little more detail than what we've just been over tonight. But that is hopefully everything you need in terms of the administrative side of overseeing a FIDE rated tournament in the US. Dave, any final comments?
I guess one of my final comments, you know, the chief arbiter is ultimately responsible for everything. And I've learned this the hard way myself. A lot of times I like to delegate things, but you're still responsible. And if one of your subordinates makes a mistake and it gets past you, well, you just made the mistake. And I've done that more than once. Administering FIDE events, there's a lot of, it's very detail oriented. And there's lots of mistakes that can be made, and I guarantee you that Chris will catch all of them. So, and then you're sheepishly correcting something that, you know, you should have done right the first time. It's hard, and that's why I say, even though an NA can direct a FIDE rated event, non-norm, again, you want to have a lot of experience doing this, because I think I have a lot of experience, and I will tell you, I still make mistakes. It is just very, very detail oriented, and it's hard to do.
Thank you, and thank you, Dave, for providing us with your expertise there. Much appreciated.